Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization anime review. This one's going to be for episode 28, which is called The Dark Territory. And I think overall this was another good episode. Though I will say that this is the first time, at least in this half of Alicization in the anime, that I've got had the problem where I really feel like this wasn't the best anime adaptation of the light novel. This is, I think, probably the most clear-cut example so far in Alicization of an episode that really skipped over a lot of information that the light novel, which covers these sections, covered in a lot more depth. There are three very distinct things that this episode left out that I think would have added more depth to what was going on here. Now, I will say, I think the episode still gets its point across on all of these things, but one of them especially, I do feel probably needed at least a little bit of an explanation beyond what we were just shown. But, yeah, it still works, it's just, it could have been much better. And it's like, yeah, I kind of would recommend people with this one just reading these kind of sections from the light novel. Again, it's volume 15 if anyone is interested. Covers most of this. So yeah, the main thing just about this episode in general I want to talk about at the start is just how kind of brutal and dark it was, with just the two really big, I suppose, deaths that we saw. The flashback sequence with Gabriel Miller killing his childhood friend Alicia, and also in the underworld him killing Lipia and then showing her severed head off to the whole Dark Territory, basically, including her fiance Shasta, and that leading to the big, confrontation and so on. Those were definitely two of the most just shocking things we've seen in all of Sword Art Online. And the fact that both of them were Gabriel Miller moments, I think, really helped to, within the first couple of episodes of us knowing about him, get across who he is as a villain and what he's about, that this is what he's willing to do. On that front, I liked how he was sort of pretty effortlessly able to slip into the role of Emperor, that he knows VR games, so he can, he knows what's going on here, of course. He's not just someone who's new to these type of things. He's not exactly as enthusiastic, you can sort of tell, about the game sort of situation as Visago is, but the fact that he immediately does the speech fits the role of the Emperor of the Dark Territory perfectly, immediately talking about burning everything down, destroying, killing, pillaging, exactly what you'd expect from the leader of the Dark Territory. And so immediately there's a level of respect without him even doing anything, just from those first couple of words from at least some of the leaders of the Dark Territory. And then his response to the assassination attempt from Lipia, obviously get even more people on his side, and then how he responds, or rather how he sort of doesn't respond to Shasta's massive attack, just at the end of this episode solidifies no one is going to doubt him as leader. And I'm sure they'll get into it in the next episode or two, but I want to make it sort of clear here that the Human Empire had the taboo index, and that was the whole idea of the subjects couldn't go against those rules because they were just so ingrained. It was just sort of almost, it was not just these are the laws, we shouldn't break them, but we literally can't unless we kind of break the seal of the right eye. That thing on the Dark Territory side is a little bit more simplified, in that their one rule effectively is that they can't disobey an order from the strongest one in the Dark Territory. So that's why anything Vecta orders at this point, they're all going to have to agree to. And this will obviously become a pretty important plot point as we go on. We learn more about these Dark Territory characters. So while we started off here with primarily Shasta and Lipia, we're going to focus in a little bit more on Ishkan here, who we get to meet as the champion of the pugilists. We don't get to see much of him here. He's just introduced. He's going to be pretty interesting. Dil as the leader of the Dark Mages. We're going to get to see bits and pieces of her. What's his name? Lillipin, the leader of the Orcs. We will get some surprising sort of focus on him a little bit later on in the season, and so on. Like we'll get focus on all of them to a certain degree, but the ones who really get attention, I've just kind of highlighted there. And so, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We have to introduce a lot of characters because there's a big war coming up, and we primarily know the characters on the good side, so we need to get introduced to more of the characters on the bad side of things. And so, like, we did have the one scene with Vizago and Gabriel Miller talking, and we got across the idea of, like, to communicate with the outside world, they have to lower the time acceleration of the game down to 1 to actually allow that communication to happen, and then they accelerate it again so that they actually have time in game to do a lot of stuff, because of course they have like a day free effectively. That's the time limit they have on the mission in the real world, but with the with the time acceleration they have multiple days upon days basically to do what they have to do in game. And then they also confirmed here again that, like, don't die in the game, because like these accounts will effectively be deleted and you'll pretty much not have anything to go back in on. So there is a sort of one chance type thing on their side of things. So that was important to get. And just setting up the idea, like, Vecta, this is what he wants to do. He wants to get everyone on his side so that they can, the second the wall comes down, that the gate that separates both sides comes down, they'll immediately rush in and he'll get what he wants, which is Alice. And and the thing that they do pretty well in this episode is get further across the idea of Gabriel Miller's obsession with the soul. And so they start off with the pretty brutal flashback of Gabriel Miller and his childhood friend, Alicia. And they don't focus on too much, just a little bit of an introduction to her. Like, here's Alicia, here's young Gabriel Miller. He gets a little bit of a lesson from his father about the whole idea of insects don't have brains. Their brain is effectively their entire nervous system, and so they can live with their head being cut off. And he, of course, notes with that idea that means that humans, if they get their head cut off, won't be able to survive. So the soul of an insect is kind of its entire body somewhere, and the soul of a human is obviously in the head somewhere because of the brain. And it starts his obsession with that, and it's clear he starts killing insects. And he, as the anime presents it, just seemingly decides one day to kill Alicia by stabbing her through the ear and letting her die in his arms. And it's brutal because they're so young, and he's just stabbed her in the ear here, and he just watches her die. And from his perspective, we see him see what seems to be her soul come out of her body, and as it sort of goes up in the air, sort of like through him, he like experiences like kind of her memories. It's like he sort of consumed her soul as it was leaving her body, and this is this amazing experience for him that kind of doubles down on the fact that he's obsessed with the soul, and it's an experience he wants to have again, and it starts his issues, I suppose, with the soul and so on. Where the light novel I think did this much better was, I think, just the little bit of context behind why he suddenly decided to kill her, and just more on what's going on here, with the idea that in the light novel they actually established that, okay, they're friends, of course, but also Gabriel's sort of idea was that one day when they're older, the two of them would actually get married, that they're both from pretty wealthy families, but then in the book they established that the financial crisis happens. They basically say like 2008, is it? Yeah, that it happens. And so the financial crisis happens, and her family is going to suffer more from it than Gabriel. So he's still going to be wealthy, she's not going to be anymore. And so he decides at this point that he had noted about her, like, her soul is so radiant, it would be terrible to sort of watch that radiance fade away as she like falls to poverty. So he just decides, I'm going to kill her as she is now, when she is still, I suppose, in his mind, like, perfect, like her soul is the way he wants it. And so that's when he decides to kill her. And I think it doesn't add a lot of extra depth, but I think it just helps to explain the character a little bit more of that's the logic he's operating under versus the way it's presented in the anime. It makes him feel a little bit more just like serial killery, which I get there sort of, it still gets that point across, but there's, I think, just a little bit more kind of nuance to it as it is in the light novel. But, still pretty brutal all the same. And then, with the death of Lipia, when he kills her, she attempts to sort of seduce him and use that as a way to distract him to, stab him. He counters that and just strangles her and kills her. And the same thing happens that he saw before, of as her soul effectively leaves her body, it sort of passes through him and he experiences some of, her memories, her emotions, because that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And he's finally like, I hadn't experienced it since that last time with Alicia all those years ago. He experiences it again and assumes that because of that, if just this random woman from the underworld, he can get that experience, that what if he did the same thing to Alice, who's an actual Alice AI? He will get the ultimate experience, the ultimate soul, basically. And that's what he's after at this point, just that experience again. And I think that makes him somewhat interesting in that he has this plan, like he's been hired by the American government, but he's seemingly now about to sort of hijack that for himself and is willing to kill Alice effectively just to get that experience of what her soul is. And this helps to explain like the whole Xenon sequence from a few episodes ago and so on. This is what he's about. This is what he's going to be doing from here on out. So that I think was it was well done. I think it just could have used the extra depth that the actual light novel has with regards to this is the more of the details on Alicia. And it is interesting there with the idea of like his childhood friend, his name was Alicia, and the actual proper AI's name is Alice, and there's a similarity between Alicia and the way she looks and Alice, and even though like they obviously had different hair colors and stuff like that, but just some of the look between them, it's very clearly meant to be similar, and that's why when he sees Alice, it's going to be pretty interesting. But I think that was just solid villain setup there overall. The rest of the episode really is sort of about Shasta and his reaction to what's going on here, with a little bit more of the details on why Lipia decides to do what she does, and that obviously they've just gotten engaged. She's all for his ideas of wanting peace, and like the idea that he knows that if he can talk to Bercoli with Administrator gone, he can get peace. And she fully agrees with this idea completely. So the first thing that he asks Vecta is, what do you plan to do now that you've like returned effectively? And so obviously both of them realize his answer is exactly the opposite of what they wanted. Vecta doesn't want peace, they do. They're going to have to take him out. And so she decides to, without telling him, try and assassinate him, gets herself killed, and of course we get his reaction to finding out the way in which she's been killed, especially the fact that she's shown off like that as a warning to everyone else, but also sort of he leaves it open. I think that is an interesting thing from him as a ruler, of just he's like, oh yeah, by all means, if you want to attack me even from behind, go ahead. If you succeed, great. If you don't, just be aware that your gamble will have backfired and you'll receive the same level of punishment that she did. And he's just being like, he's kind of like, I admire these sort of underhanded tactics. Go ahead with them. Just make sure that you succeed with them. So that's pretty good leadership on his part. And this is where we get into, I think, where maybe some of the problems come in here. And that, look, ultimately, Shasta is not meant to be the most important character in Alicization. But he's, I think, interesting enough, the role that he plays as like the leader of the Dark Knights, the opposite of the Integrity Knights. I think it's interesting enough that they should have given him his full story, more or less. The light novel has so much more depth on him as a character, in that just on a really basic note, they cover his own backstory with his own master. They cover his master's duel with Bercoli, and then, you know, covering as well all the way his own Shasta's own training and build up to his fight with Bercoli, what he learns by surviving that fight with Bercoli, and why he actually knows Bercoli enough that there is a chance for peace. It covers a lot of ground with regards to just, I think, forming his own opinion on things, of just like the reason he is the most seemingly like open and different of all of the Dark Territory leaders is because his interactions with Bercoli have sort of changed him and opened him up a little bit. In that, I think you can tell already that Bercoli, while not being an ALICE AI, is closer than a lot of characters. Like, he notes that like Alice did what he could never do, but like he's obviously come close to. And the same way that he's grown, that kind of change has kind of been transferred on to Shasta a little bit. They cover like details about like the different sword styles and stuff like that. This is the Dark Knight style of sword play. And I think probably one of the biggest things is just the idea that the Dark Knights don't actually know the details about enhanced armament and memory release sword abilities. That they pretty much just rely on sort of incarnation power, like putting their will into their swords so their strikes are powerful, but they don't inherently have a, you know, special ability with their swords or anything like that. Whereas Bercoli, of course, does with his time-splitting blade. We'll find out later on in the season what his ultimate ability is, but we've already seen his enhanced armament ability, the ability to place cuts into the future. And that's kind of how he beats Shasta's master, and it's kind of how he beats Shasta himself. And it's covering basically that from that fight, sort of Shasta learned and got a different perspective, and eventually learned how to do his own enhanced armament. So the attack that he was about to do before he gets poisoned by the leader of the Assassin's Guild is his enhanced armament ability of his divine object, which is this kind of special katana sword that has like a water element to it. So his powers are sort of water-based in mist. And the book reveals that what his enhanced armament is that his sword basically turns into a black mist. And anything that black mist touches basically gets hit as if it's been cut. So if you're engulfed with the black mist, you just get cut all over, basically. So that's his first level of powerful ability. And then, as we see here, as he is dying and as he releases his incarnation to its like full degree, he basically becomes his memory release attack as he's dying. So this is the ability he would have been able to use, but actually only activates here for the first time through just the pure willpower, pure emotion about the fact that Libya was killed in such a way, and his desire to kill Vecta for what he did. And I like that. I like the scene where it cuts away to show... It cuts out to show the light cube cluster that is effectively Shasta's brain, and like the pathway that basically this power takes to like activate within him. I think it was probably one of the clearest cut examples of this is the power of incarnation. Like we've seen with Kirito and Yujo, the idea that it makes their swords like bigger, it makes it glow and stuff like that. That's where Kirito's like Black Swordsman sort of outfit came from in the last couple of episodes of the first half of the season. Just pure will allowing something unique to happen. The same with this last-ditch attack here, which again is the third thing that the light novel explains better, that they leave for you to interpret just the visuals from. And I think the one point that probably should have been said somewhere along the line by some character, though I don't really know what character it could have been here. This is probably where like the way it was told in the light novel even is a little bit of like, wait, it's kind of difficult for a character to say anything about this, so we have to just have like it said in narration, and you can't necessarily really have just pure narration in the anime, because it explains that, you know, Gabriel Miller was actually in trouble in this attack because he didn't realize it at the time, but this is the way Shasta's final attack actually worked. So the way we visually see the attack is that he turns into just this kind of like tornado, like vortex of black mist. So there's a link to what his enhanced armament is, but this is the memory release, so it works differently. And the idea is that it seems to just basically like dissolve effectively anything it touches. It just tears completely apart instantaneously anything that's engulfed with it. That's what happens to DIL with her leg. He just completely murders the two leaders of the two goblin factions, and as well as the Assassin's Guild leader, and he then targets Vecta. What's not covered in the anime but is in the light novel is that the way this attack works isn't that it just basically takes people's HP out super quickly and dissolves them. It actually is an attack that goes past the system effectively. It doesn't have anything to do with defense points, authority control level, hit points. His attack sends basically a signal of death, pure death, at the person who he's attacking's Fluctlight, and basically kills it at the source. And then it works backwards from there, and the result of accepting your death effectively is that you dissolve into nothingness like the two goblin leaders. That's how this ability works. It's an instant kill attack because it doesn't target the systems of the game. It targets the Fluctlight effectively. So that's how that ability works. That's why you then see when he attacks Vecta, he's basically in Vecta's soul, because his attack is basically targeting Vecta's Fluctlight, which is Gabriel Miller's brain. So he's in there, and he's immediately like, "What? This is different than the others. Like he's basically like, there's nothing here. It's neither his soul is neither like thriving nor is it dead. It's just a sort of empty void, and like it's as if like he doesn't feel or experience anything. There's nothing here to latch onto, and so because of that, there's kind of nothing to send that signal of death into, and that's why the ability just doesn't work on him, because effectively it's like, there's no, like, the way they explain it in the novel is that effectively anyone else who gets this signal would immediately be like, I don't want to die, and in saying that they accept that death is an option, and the signal of death actually works. But because Gabriel Miller just kind of in a way has like zero response whatsoever to this, like he doesn't really move to defend the attack or anything like that, so it just sort of passes through his Fluctlight and just doesn't work, whereas an attack that did just do HP damage would have actually worked in this case. So it just highlights this sort of invulnerability that Vecta has within this game to attacks that are going to directly target his own soul, that he cares so much about other people's souls, but seems to have this protection against attacks that sort of target his own. So incarnation isn't as powerful against him as it is against anyone else. That's the main point that this section is meant to get across, that in this moment Gabriel Miller learns that is a sort of an ability that he has within this game, is that some of the highest level abilities are not going to work on him because of the way that they operate. So yeah, that means his final attack just ends up not working on Vecta at all. So that is the death of Shasta, and the fact that Vecta just immediately after this is just like, okay, well, that was interesting. Next in command of the factions who got their leaders wiped out, just take command. Yeah, we're done here. Just super casual. There's no question that like he was just attacked by one of the most powerful things that they've ever seen. He just instantly is like, next in command, come on guys, get ready. The gate is about to collapse. Let's go to war effectively. And so we do get that final scene that's more of a tease for the next episode of Alice with Kirito arriving at the wall, realizing there's this sort of thing written on the wall that doesn't really fit as something that would just be written on a wall. It's clearly this system thing that makes it clear that it's part of a game. You know, the whole load, the final thing is the stress test. And she's just like, what does that mean? And it sort of becomes clear to her some of the stuff that Kirito has been talking to her about is real. And she realizes the wall is crumbling. She looks over, sees the Dark Territory on the march, and realizes, I was right to jump back into action when I did. It's time to prepare the human forces for what's coming. And so that's clearly what next episode is going to be about, is the preparation of the Integrity Knights and everyone else for the battle to come. And then we're going to get into the first stages of the battle. I don't know how many episodes they'll do before we get, obviously, the arrival of Osno, we know, is coming in at some point. And then we're getting into some of the really, really good stuff. And it's just going to be action, 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 action from there on out. So, like I said, I'll definitely praise this episode because I think it did execute a lot of things very, very interestingly. In terms of, like, visually, Shasta's memory release, I think, was really well done in terms of, like, reading the book again here ahead of this video. It's like, yes, that is exactly the way to visually represent what is said in the novel, of just this cyclone of, like, black mist and just tearing people apart, and he's just become part of it because he's effectively dead at that point, and so on. The brutality of what Gabriel Miller does throughout this episode, both the past in killing Alicia, but also in the present and killing Lipia, it just helps to get across. He is the villain, and we absolutely hate him now. How could we defeat him? It was that episode where it's just like, full on hate him, good villain setup, I want to see him be defeated. I want the heroes to win because I hate this villain so much, and they did that very, very well. It is just, I think, a criticism of this one is that it's probably the most egregious example in Alicization so far of just skipping over a lot of material, like a good amount of context for the Alicia scene just left out, basically why he did it, and just not enough details around, like, who Alicia really is, I suppose, but the effect still is gotten across fairly well. The backstory of Shasta being left out, like, all of it, I think is a little bit of a problem. Like, I sort of understand to a degree, like, okay, maybe you don't need to cover, like, all of the stuff from, like, way before with his own master, but I think you should have focused in on his own encounter with Broccoli as being an important moment, and, like, what Broccoli says to him to sort of drive him forward. The idea is, like, Broccoli says something along the lines to him in their battle of, like, if you come at me with nothing but, like, murderous and killing intent, like, your strike will never land home. The idea that, you know, just empowering your blade with just the will to kill is not the most kind of powerful way to do things, and so he sort of had to find a way to sort of power himself up out of just not just out of sort of rage to kill your enemy. And so the reason he was more powerful here is because he did it to sort of take revenge for what happened out of love, basically, and that's why his attack was so powerful. That's sort of what he learned from this, was like that peace is possible rather than just, I'm a Dark Knight, I need to kill the Integrity Knight. That was definitely skipped out, and I think perhaps it was a little bit of the team behind the anime not placing as much of an importance on Shasta as I think a lot of the fandom perhaps would, and so they just felt like, oh, he's a minor character, he is just as kind of not as important as any of the other sort of Dark Territory generals who were just killed here, so we don't need to go into a lot of depth. And then the final thing about just not explaining his attack so well was, I think, just an example of the scenes not really allowing for any sort of an explanation, in that Gabriel Miller at the time of this wouldn't really know what is happening to explain why it doesn't work on him, and then Shasta doesn't know enough about the fact that he's in a game to know what exactly his attack is doing. So the only way for that to work would be to either have someone there, like a Kirito, for example, but he's out of action, to explain it, or just pure narration, and they haven't done that so far, so it would be a bit weird to just introduce a narrator explaining what's happening on screen. And that's the benefit that the book has that the anime can't really do unless it had introduced a narrator much earlier on. So they did what they could, and visually they got it across relatively well. I think you just have to make the jump to like assume that, oh, his attack, the reason he's in like Gabriel Miller's soul is because his attack targets the soul. It's a little bit of a jump, but I would have liked something along the lines of just Gabriel Miller just noting that, like, his attack went for my flux light or something like that, just to get that across as well as it needed to. But yeah, that's the review. I know this one was much longer than the other ones, but is one I wanted to go in depth on this one to explain what this episode did and did not leave out. A lot of the other times with the episodes, it may leave out a little bit here or there, but in general, it's fairly good at covering a lot of the details. Like, even in the earlier arcs, yes, they left out little bits and pieces here and there about some of the setup and the technology stuff, but they still got most of the explanations across. This was definitely the biggest example of, like, you left out pages upon pages of backstory and stuff like that here. So I hope this doesn't become a trend as we go forward, because we're going to get a lot of like smaller backstory, smaller character arcs here as, like, you know, the different Dark Territory members get their own stories, and we're going to get introduced to more Integrity Knights and they get their own sort of smaller stories. I hope they're not skipped over as much as, you know, little bits and pieces were here. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this one, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.